Ego death. Sounds like a pretty serious topic, right? And it can be in a way. Unfortunately, often this topic is misunderstood quite regularly in my experience, which can put people a little bit wrong in terms of what it's even referring to, and then also how they would work with this concept. You know, it can lead to them working with it in some ways that are quite detrimental, actually. So that is going to be the topic of this episode of Chi Life. I did actually think about going to a graveyard to film this vlog, but then I thought that might be a little bit too morbid. So instead, I'm taking you with me on a walk just around a beautiful location next to the coast. Some nice stone walkways. So anyway, you might get to enjoy a little bit of scenery while we talk about this topic. Now, I did actually write an article on this topic as well, but it is quite a fairly densely theoretical sort of a topic, and so might be a little bit dry, the article. I'll put a link below to that article if you do want to read that as well, but this is an opportunity to just talk about it in a conversational way, which will help hopefully to give some good insight into it. So, what is ego death? Well, before we can really talk about ego death in a meaningful way and come to a good, useful understanding of it, we really need to understand what the ego is. And this really is where I think a lot of the confusion comes in about ego death. It comes down to people's definition that they're using of what the ego is. Because there's a common definition of how we often use the term ego in our regular conversation. And we talk of ego as I guess an equivalent of a sort of self-importance, how big an idea of themselves someone has. And so, you know, if you say someone is egotistical or they have a big ego, typically this is going to mean that they're very arrogant, they're very prideful, they think everything's about them. They don't have much concern for other people often because they're concerned about themselves, and this, you know, then creates conflicts with other people and so on. And so ego gets this negative connotation. And then on the flip side of that, you know, you might talk about someone having no ego. And people, you know, then think of that, oh, that's a really good thing, because someone having no ego, well, that means they don't have those other things, pride and excessive conflict and arrogance and maybe even aggressiveness, things like that. And so therefore it's like, yeah, get rid of the ego. That would be a good thing, because that means getting rid of all of those bad traits and essentially then maybe becoming a humble and a nice person. So that's sort of a common way that ego is used. But to understand ego death, we need to go to a deeper understanding and definition of what ego is. Ego, in its essence, is our self-identity at a very deep level. It's not just like who we think we are, it's actually our ability to distinguish ourselves from the external world around us, to literally recognize ourselves as a separate entity. And if you're wondering why I'm looking up and down often while I'm doing this, it's because I'm walking over these rocks, and yeah, they're going up and down as well. I need to look where I'm putting my feet, so hopefully that's not too distracting. So where were we? Okay, what is our ego? Literally our identity of ourself, our ability to identify ourselves, where we end and the rest of the world begins. Now, of course, there is a connection between that and that more common, I guess, colloquial use of the term ego, referring to pride and all that sort of thing. Because for you to have those sorts of characteristics, well, you have to have some some self-identity in order to then, put those extra characteristics to it. But again, at a fundamental level, our ego is our self-identity. It's not whether we then think of that and have an inflated sense of that self-identity. It's simply having a self-identity. So why would we want to kill or destroy our very identity? Well, there can be some problems with that, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But first I will talk about, well, what is the benefit of doing this? Why do people try to do this? And there's a healthy way to do it as well when you understand it properly, because this is something that is often part of meditative practices, is seeking to kill the ego. Or in recent times, often people will also use psychologically active chemical substances as well to try to achieve this state. From a philosophical point of view, one of the things that philosophers or people who are inquiring into life, into reality, one of the things that they often want to achieve is a clearer perspective and understanding of reality. And in that context, the ego actually presents a little bit of a problem, because our sense or our ability to perceive reality around us is filtered through our perception of ourself. Now, there's different layers to this, Part of this, it can be things like just the preconceptions that we have about the world. When we then look at the world, this of course shapes how we see the world. At a even more fundamental level, and again it's connected, we only ever have the ability to view the world, to view reality from our own perspective. And so we have this limited view, and again potentially distorted by preconceptions that we already have about the world around us. So if we want to be able to perceive reality more clearly, more directly, it sounds like a good idea to maybe be able to remove the self, essentially remove the filter or remove the lens, so that we can then observe directly reality. So this is what people are often seeking from a philosophical point of view, a directer perception of reality. But then something else that comes from this, so of course wrapped up in our identity, our perception of ourselves, comes all sorts of ideas about ourselves and our place within the universe around us. And attached to this can come stresses, conflicts between how we perceive ourselves and the environment we actually find ourselves in, and the feedback we get from that environment. It can also include insecurities, all these sorts of things. And a lot of this creates, what we might think of some of the existential stress that many people experience in experiencing their lives. And so to be able to take out that self-identity then brings a relief from these stresses, from the conflict between the conception they have of themselves and the world around them. In addition to this, so without the self or the ego, we no longer perceive ourselves as separate from the universe around us. And so we perceive ourselves as connected to this much greater whole. We're relieved from all of those stresses, and so this can bring sensations of bliss and contentment and freedom and harmony. So you can see why this is an attractive thing for people to pursue. And you can see why also, some people are tempted to use psychologically active chemicals or substances of some sort to help them to enter into this state. And sometimes people can have amazing experiences using those chemicals, using those substances. In general though, to pursue this sort of state, it's generally safer in the long run to do it through meditation, because then it's a process, in fact it's a skill of sorts that you develop over time and that you're in control of, and you build up to it gradually. The meditative practices actually for heading towards this sort of state are often surprisingly simple, but they do require practice. They do require developing skill, working with yourself to develop that skill. So it becomes that you're very much you're in control of, you're directing this process. Sometimes when people use chemicals or some kind of substance to enter this state, again, maybe they're not fully prepared for it, because they haven't developed this ability over time, and maybe it doesn't go so well for them sometimes. And so instead of having an experience of bliss and contentment and things like that, rather than escaping their insecurities and conflicts and things like that by removing the ego, they instead experience a deep sense of lost, and they just feel lost and devastated. And sometimes as part of that, the insecurities and things become even stronger, because it hasn't been developed in a steady, considered way. So people are free to make their own decisions about how they want to do these things, but safety, long-term effects, a lot harder work, a lot more dedication required to work towards this through meditation, but a lot safer in many ways as well. So those are some of the benefits, or some of the reasons why someone might want to pursue ego death. What are some of the dangers of trying to kill your ego? Because after all, that was the title of this vlog. So a lot of those dangers come from that misconception or misunderstanding of what the ego even is. So when people think of the ego as something that is inherently bad, and they're thinking of it as pride, arrogance, aggression, tendency to conflict, insecurity, all of these sorts of things, they can have the idea that maybe it's a good idea to actually kill the ego. And of course that's not actually really possible, because the ego literally is our sense of self, our ability to identify ourselves. Without that, we have no context for what we perceive. We have no ability to differentiate ourselves from the things around us. We have no ability to understand things like cause and effect, and to accomplish the most basic sort of tasks to keep ourselves alive, because we would have no concept of ourselves. So there always has to be some level of ego for us to be alive. But those who really pursue this in a really strong way, well, for some of them, they might have some degree of success. They won't get all the way to completely extinguishing their ego. But they might find themselves with their ego so greatly reduced that they experience a high level of dissociation, and as part of that, a difficulty actually functioning in life, because if they really truly came close to killing or destroying their ego, they'd have a hard time interacting with the world around them. So that's one danger, not so common, but it can happen sometimes. Again, more commonly that's going to be in people who try a fast path for doing this, because it doesn't have the same degree of safety. But not all that common, but there is some risk of that. There are some other risks that are maybe a little bit more common, and one of those, again, it connects to this idea of killing the self. And so they don't manage to do that, but what they do is, instead of tying a lot of their ideas about their self-identity to themselves, they displace it and project it onto something else. And this could be another person, it could be an object, it could be an organization, or an idea even. And so when they do this, they now think, I'm a good person because I no longer have these traits of arrogance, pride, etc., 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 because it's not about me anymore. But they actually do have a lot of these same traits in a way, but they've displaced them and projected them onto something else. And so this is something that sometimes happens with people who are, well, it sometimes brings extreme behavior, so extremists of one sort or another. And so rather than them reacting to any kind of encroachment on their own identity, they will react and feel, whether it be feeling hurt, whether it be responding aggressively or so on, to any kind of encroachment on this other thing that they have displaced their ego onto. Now, in many ways, they're in a worse position than having those same insecurities and traits just about themselves, because this now becomes harder to resolve because things are being misdirected. The discomfort they feel with their life, with dealing with the reality around them, is now projected onto something else which they don't really have control over. And so if they're trying to do things in relationship to that, they're not really dealing with the root problem, which is probably within themselves. I've made it to a little beach now, so I might not have to look up and down for at least a few steps. We'll see how that goes. So one more risk of trying to kill your ego, maybe not going all the way to, really, again, probably not completely killing your ego, but damaging it so badly that you dissociate, can't connect to the world around you, or interact with the world around you. Maybe not displacing your sense of identity either. But it can be where, again, you take on these sort of moral assumptions about the ego, and then as part of that, this can lead to self-loathing, essentially, and self-sabotage, because maybe there's some sense that any kind of self-esteem, self-worth, is a bad thing, because that would somehow be having an ego, and you've decided that ego in and of itself is bad. And so this, of course, is no good to you or to anyone around you, because you're likely to either consciously or unconsciously seek out situations that feed into this perception that you want to have of yourself. And so you'll do things to stop yourself from experiencing having success, do things that create problems for yourself, so that you have ways to, in a way, you're kind of rewarding yourself by feeling like you're no good, because it would be bad to feel like you are good, which doesn't really help anyone. So those are some of the risks of trying to kill your ego, which doesn't mean that pursuing ego death is actually necessarily a risky thing. Pursued through steady, diligent practice, through meditation, it can actually be a very healthy thing. And again, maybe it's better, to help to avoid confusion, to use the term ego dissolution rather than ego death, because you're not actually going to completely get rid of your ego in this process, but what you will do is you will down-regulate your sense of self, so that it doesn't obscure your perception of the universe around you to the same degree. There always has to be some level of ego, or again, you wouldn't be able to perceive your interaction with the universe around you. But you down-regulate it, and this can lead to new insights. It can lead to those deep senses of contentment, maybe even bliss as part of your practice. And it can also just help you to see things in new ways. It can help you to temporarily put aside some of the distortions that might be there within your ego, some insecurities, things like that. And then by temporarily, because this is a temporary process, by temporarily doing that, and then allowing your sense of self to upregulate again, come back to normal levels, you can bring some of those insights back into your normal day-to-day life and interaction with the world around you. And this can be useful to help to dislodge some of those distortions that you may have, and to see things in a new way, and to help to overcome different misconceptions or problems that you may have in your life or in your feeling about your interaction with the world around you. There are, of course, other aspects of working with your ego as well, and I'm actually going to make another vlog about that. I figured this one is probably long enough at this point. I did actually write a bit about some of these other aspects of working with your ego in the same article, so that link will be in the description below. But yeah, you can, if you want to learn more or think more about some of these aspects of working with your identity, yeah, I'm going to make another vlog about a contrasting view or a contrasting way of working with the ego. And in many ways it can seem like actually the polar opposite, but from a Chinese philosophy perspective, we know that when we truly understand opposites, we actually find that there's harmony between them. And so we'll talk about that in that next vlog as well. Alright, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Chi Life. A little bit of a deep topic, but hopefully cast some useful light on it. I'm finally back to making some videos on topics that relate to Qigong, and in this case to philosophy and meditation. So you can look forward to some more like that coming up soon. If you did like the video, please like, comment, subscribe, share it with other people who might enjoy this and also the other videos that I put on the channel as well. And I look forward to seeing you on the next one.